Hi everyone. So, as introduced, I'm Brendan Lee. I'm the head of TMT for Goldman, and we're privileged today to have three leaders from some of the most successful Australian tech stories in the market today. So, just from my left to right, we've got Richard White here, who's the executive director and founder, CEO of Wisetech. Hamish McLennan, who's the chairman of REA Group, and Sam Weiss, who's the chairman of Altium. Thanks for being here today. So, gentlemen, I guess maybe a question for Sam and Richard to start with, given I think you're probably the newest members to the magic milestone of the $1 billion club. What have been some of the key pain points in your journeys to scaling up to reaching this point, and what have been some of the key lessons that you can perhaps share with us about how your companies have managed through those pain points?
Thank you, Richard. I suppose the most searing for me at Altium was I wasn't with the company in 1999 when it had a spectacularly successful listing at the peak of the tech boom and rode up to a $600 million market cap in the early 2000s. And then by taking our eye off the ball, we rode it down to an $8 million market cap 5 years ago. And when none of your shareholders are even willing to talk to you other than to yell and scream, and it's difficult to get customers to talk because they think you're going to go out of business. There are pain points everywhere. And what we learned from that experience was, first of all, to avoid interesting distractions, to focus on the core business, to focus on our customers, and to focus on growing revenues faster than costs. And if you do that and continue to build cutting-edge technology, which we had always done, things turn around, and they have in quite spectacular fashion for us. The second challenge, other than that, hitting that nadir, was to have the difficult conversation with the founder on when is the most appropriate time to leave. And I think that it's something that all founders need to have an understanding of, in that everyone has a time to leave, and if you can pick yours yourself, it's almost always far better for the company.
Well, that was great, actually, because I must tell you, I have followed Altium for a long time, and we actually use the software internally, and I'm a very, very old user of the original Protel product, which goes back more years than I care to mention. Yeah, I think it's a bit more than that even. Anyway, what was the question? the friction points, yeah. So Sam mentioned some things that I mentioned yesterday, and this is a very resonant and important issue, sticking to the knitting and not getting distracted. I think I used the word shiny object syndrome. It's a very common problem in tech. You see something new and exciting and you stop and stare at it whilst the world passes you by. You slow down and you absorb that new thing, and you keep doing the new thing and never delivering on your promises. But our specific pain points, I think we had those two pieces pretty well done. So our specific pain points were how to break an old model of software, which was very prevalent around sort of 2005, 2006, which was an old licensing model that I think everybody lived with, in fact, including Altium, where you sold a so-called one-time license, a big upfront sale, and then you had small dollars coming in every year for maintenance. And this was a couple of problems with it. From the company's point of view, you get a big chunk of cash, and that causes a lot of behavioural problems. It also makes the sales very hard. It drives discounting, and it drives other promises that you probably shouldn't make in order to get those big chunks of cash. And this, in 2006 and 7, when we were globalising the business, became very painful. We had some very talented, very big-end salespeople that made all sorts of promises which, when I looked at them, I was, horrified. And we, in 2008, changed our model to what we call an on-demand model. It's actually different to what people think of as SaaS. SaaS is a variation on the one-time license where you don't pay it all up front, but you still usually have a contract period, and you usually have a feature set in that contract period. Our demand model is different. We give the software for free upfront and give everything. Every module, every function, every capability, every transaction set is available to the customer. Our job is to get that customer live and get them using it, and then they expand into the transaction set and use, and at each end of each month we bill them for what the previous month usage was. Now that model, I can tell you, I also told you yesterday in my presentation that the thing to do is to jettison those parts of the business that aren't working, and then people are going to tell you how wrong you are. And one of the companies we bought in the US, the founder of that company, in the board meeting when I announced the on-demand model, I had a very detailed presentation, and he said, "You're going to destroy the company." He's a director. I want to sell my shares now. I have to get the hell out of here. Now that particular model was the saviour of the company. That was 6 months before the global financial crisis. And in the global financial crisis, one-time license models went to zero. Nobody had capital budgets at all. And we grew 3% every single month through the global financial crisis. And we were able to sign companies that had no capital budget but wanted software to optimise and improve their performance because they were all downsizing at the same time as the world was going to hell in a handbasket. Now, that single change was huge and very important, but there are many of those changes along the way, and I mentioned them yesterday. We digitised all of our learning so that we don't provide consulting or training services. That's all out in a field consultancy business set. It was 210 odd consultants doing that worldwide. We couldn't possibly scale to that size. So this idea was pulling the friction pieces out of the business was very hard to do, and there were lots of people telling me that it wasn't going to work because it's not traditional. It's not the way people expect it. So the real pain point is fighting against these things called best practice and fighting against these things called tradition and the way that things are in the world. To break those and make something delightfully better, you've really got to be quite courageous, and you've got to absolutely know the cause and effect of the change you're making. I've got to know when I make a change, certain things are going to happen and that will result in this outcome. And I've got to be pretty confident about the steps that occur and that it will actually turn up like that.
Hamish, maybe one for you. I think in a lot of the conversations we have with emerging tech companies, that one of the key questions that comes up a lot is how to manage the balance between optimising revenue growth and profitability. Over the course of REA's journey, how have you guys thought about that?
Well, look, we've been profitable for a long time, and all of our indices have always been heading in the right direction since I've been on the board, but for at least the last 10 years. Our attitude was always try and get market share and market leadership and have faith that the marketplace that we've created will drive profitability. So it was always marketing, market share, and let the business take care of itself, which seems almost a little bit flippant, and we've always been focused on profit and driving it. The really interesting thing in our vertical, in our marketplace, was about 5 years ago, by our estimation, digital advertising in classifieds reached that cliched tipping point where it was sort of 50% of the market, and we always felt once we went beyond that we'd really see a collapse our way in the market and that our revenues would drive, and that's exactly what happened. So we always had great faith in our product. We thought that it was superior to everything that was out there, but then once the market turned, it turned in our favour, and there were many years of just chipping away where we were trying to promote ourselves and get our critical mass going. Once we hit that 50% mark as an industry, when digital took over, it really fell our way.
And what about maybe perhaps in some of the offshore businesses that you guys are now pursuing, which I guess are perhaps at that slightly earlier growth stage?
Yeah. So, look, I've spent the majority of the last 15 years of my working life outside of the country, living overseas and travelling, but we had, and this is when you should take a lot of credit, but we had, upwards of around 400 million sitting on our balance sheet for a couple of years. And we felt that with such strong revenues, and the really interesting thing, I think, with digital real estate in this country is that we are the most advanced, perhaps with the UK, but further advanced than what's happening in the US. which is ironic when you think about the startup culture in Silicon Valley and those great businesses that have been built. But we have such a lead here. So our view was we want to be an Australian multinational driven out of Australia and to parlay our expertise and our experience overseas. And the interesting thing is, once you really get your head under the bonnet of this particular vertical, whilst market structures change from around the world, there are a lot of similarities in terms of how people consume digital real estate media, how the market dynamics work, and if you can parlay that success that you've had in one market to another, then you'll do well.
Thanks. Sam, maybe one for you. The fact that you're sitting here today is indicative of the fact that, over the years, your company's resisted the urge to go to Silicon Valley as many others have. Why is that? And what has been sort of some of the reasons that have kept you, focused as being a listed Australian company?
Well, we like being listed in Australia because there are very few technology companies here and very few US dollar denominated companies. So there is literally a wall of cash that is interested in investing in companies like ours that can deliver steady growth in both revenue and earnings. And we only have 3 global competitors, 2 listed in the US and 1 in Japan, and we have by far the highest multiple of the 4. So we're a big advocate of the ASX for that reason. There are some disadvantages for us. Our management team is in the United States, and Brandon is right. We moved very deliberately to San Diego instead of Silicon Valley. One of the reasons for that was that we felt we'd be much more likely to keep our engineering team if we were in San Diego than in Silicon Valley. And secondly, it's a much lower cost place to live, and it's certainly close enough to the valley. And we run a global business from there. The impost on our CEO is that he has to come to Australia 3 times a year to do the results, and we have spent a lot of time talking to investors on the telephone, but increasingly we're seeing Australian fund managers visit us in California. So the globalization that's taking place through technology, through whether it's telephone, Skype, makes it very easy to communicate regularly from California to Sydney.
And Sam, I mean, with the current sort of political climate and state of uncertainty in the US, I mean, how do you think that's potentially going to impact how Australian companies and others, I guess, think about Silicon Valley and sort of the relative merits of staying in Australia versus potentially, moving offshore?
Well, politics is always a dangerous subject, so I'll just make a couple of comments. I learned last week that 46% of the workforce in Silicon Valley was born somewhere other than the United States, which is one of the reasons why leaders of the very big technology companies are quite outspoken about immigration policy in the United States. I think it's highly unlikely that American entrepreneurs are going to come to Australia because they think it's a more vibrant place, and I would certainly echo the comments that Joost made about Australia and moving faster. The pace in the United States is palpably faster than it is here, and that's not a criticism of Australia. It's more a statement, and my view is that whilst there is some tremendous theater about the current American presidential administration, most business is just getting on with life.
Richard, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so I think that's an incredibly important point about political change and risk, and I just want to give a couple of examples of an entrepreneurial thinking pattern versus a risk thinking pattern. So I had my head of creative, who's a very, very intelligent guy, lives in the UK, and he sat in my office and he said, "Oh my God, Richard, what are we going to do? Brexit. Brexit's terrible. Brexit's the end of the world. You know, we're going to destroy our UK business. What are we going to do?" And I said, "Well, Lawrence, I just want you to sit there and I want you to keep that thought in your head. Put that right in the front lobes and just keep that painful, risk-averse thought in your front lobes. I'm going to show you one quotation and see what it does to you." And I brought up a comment from the HMRC, which is the customs service in the UK, that said, in order to deliver Brexit, the customs service of the UK will have to expand its customs entry capability from 50 million entries a year to 350 million entries a year. Now, we do those customs entries. So that's a, 7 times increase in business. And that's only on the UK side, because everywhere else in Europe that trades with the UK has the same issue in reverse. So France and the Netherlands and Germany and everywhere else has to add another 300 million customs entries in order to cope. Now, when you think about that, you suddenly see what looks like an incredible problem as an incredible opportunity. Now, I'm not going to make a comment about Trump or politics in general, because I think that's the job of other people, and I want to stay away from that particular hot potato anyway. But what I will tell you is that change is always opportunity if you look at it in the right way. A good entrepreneur doesn't look at the risk only, but they look at the possible ramifications of change and see where that change needs to be ameliorated or dealt with. And if Trump doesn't put up border taxes, which is a possibility, then trade will continue to expand, and that will be part of that growth of trade. If Trump puts up border taxes dramatically, then the requirement to do much more advanced clearances and to classify goods more correctly and to deal with the supply chain problems and to tap into the movement of goods in a different way, we'll be able to adjust for that and leverage that capability as well. So ambidextrously, you can be, very, very good about seeing risk as opportunity. Every risk is an opportunity. Every threat, has a benefit. So you just have to think about it differently. And that's this idea of when you talk about CEOs, and there are CEOs that are sales CEOs and they drive the company forward. There are CEOs that are cost reduction and efficiency CEOs and they drive the profits, but they don't necessarily grow the company. Why not be ambidextrous with that as well? Why not actually think about how can I do both at the same time? That's true leadership, is to be able to do all the things necessary to optimise the business so that it grows as fast as possible and is actually cutting costs and improving yield and efficiency at the same time. Why not do the bigger challenge? Why not take the bigger palette and try to paint the bigger picture?
I'm also going to open it up for questions from the audience. So if anyone's out there thinking of something, you'll have your opportunity in a few moments. Hamish, another one for you perhaps. There's been a bunch of new government policies introduced in Australia over the last few years, tax breaks for R&D, tax breaks for VC investing. And I think, the general sort of level of the ecosystem around the tech sector seems to have really evolved a little bit in the last few years in Australia. Do you think the regulatory and market settings here now are adequate to really sort of increase the likelihood of breeding that next set of unicorns in the Australian market?
Look, as Richard said, entrepreneurs will look for opportunity, and I think all the people who sit in this room are fantastic, executives and people who are passionate about the digital space. I just don't think Australia is an easy place to do business, and I take my hat off to anyone who's built a business. It doesn't have to be a unicorn. It doesn't matter if you've got 3 people, 300 or 3,000 people. It's a high tax bureaucratic place to work, and I think Canberra's dysfunctional. I think they pay lip service to business. I think they pay some lip service to the digital economy. If you broadly look at media, I think it's out of control in terms of the lack of insight and foresight in terms of where that industry is going, because we all feed off each other in that regard. So it's a wonderful place to live. We're all Australians. We believe in this country, and for the people that have built big companies from here, good on them and all credit. But there are just more fertile, sort of economies, I guess, that are out there. If you go to Silicon Valley, it's a modern day gold rush. If you go to Singapore or Malaysia in our part of the world, there's a genuine and real commitment to building digital businesses, and it's just easier to do business in those parts of the world. And then, there are obviously other jurisdictions. So I worry in this virtual world how hard it is for our people to compete, because, there are lower tax, more efficient places to raise capital and to domicile your company. And I don't think Canberra's really thinking about that.
Richard or Sam, do you guys have any comment on that?
Well, look, again, I will stay away from political comments as much as possible. But what I would say to you is that capital is highly mobile and intelligence is highly mobile. And any country that is going to retain, develop an ecosystem that is a technology ecosystem, technology is the most mobile of models. We can sit on a computer and do business practically anywhere and everywhere. And I find Australia is an excellent place because it's secure, its culture is strong, its education system is good. It doesn't have the sort of violent movements of opinion and politics and other things. I generally agree that let's say that politics generally is dysfunctional, and that the press seems to focus on little things that are tiny, very unimportant, and they seem to miss the big picture about growing the future and creating value. But ultimately, you can create your own ecosystem. If you've got enough focus on what you're supposed to do, you can build a business anywhere. I chose to build it in Australia because it's very convenient, very safe, very solid. The things that I needed were just stability. And so from that point of view, I really don't think we're not starting on a bad platform, but if you don't change the tax systems to compete internationally, and if you don't change the ecosystems to be really vibrant, then you are going to have people leaving the country because they perceive, whether it's true or not, they perceive opportunity as elsewhere, and that's a problem for Australia.
So any questions from the audience? Maybe back to you, Sam. I mean, Altium's obviously been a very successful disruptor in its market. Now that you've really established a sort of leadership position on a global scale in your field, how much of your time do you worry about sort of being disrupted yourself, and what do you do to plan against that?
We worry about that all the time. One of our favorite boardroom phrases is Andy Grove of Intel. Yes, only the paranoid survive. And we're paranoid about everything. We're paranoid that we have three major competitors, all of whom are well known, but there might be someone sitting here today who says, well, I can make a better software tool to design printed circuit boards, and you probably could. So we have to be constantly reinventing and reinvesting in our business, and not being afraid to look at things differently, because we're at the center of the electronics industry, and the electronics industry is changing radically, and rather than try to follow that change, we've decided that we want to lead the change, and so we are positioning Altium to be at the forefront of electronics design and the integration of different kinds of design tools to create the electronics products of the future. But paranoia is a great way to stay competitive.
Yeah, go for it, Richard.
I love that book, by the way. It's a fantastic book. And Andy Grove in the book talks about inflection points and predicting inflection points. But what you just said was you're going to make your own inflection point, which is both incredibly courageous, but also incredibly innovative. In fact, that's one of the things that I would encourage people to do. Instead of waiting for something to pass you by and then going, oh, that was an opportunity I missed, you can actually, if you have enough customer base and enough capability in a market, you can create inflection points if they're done carefully. You can't build a lot of them at one time. You've got to build one and work very hard at it, but it is possible to build inflection points. And that way you get to not just control the inflection point, but you get to create it, drive it, own it, and make it really powerful. So that's a great comment.
So just last question to wrap things up. There's obviously a lot of very big thematics which are floating around the tech universe today, things like AI, virtual reality, blockchain, etc. Of all the different thematics swirling around, do you think, which of those do you think perhaps Australia has the best chance to succeed in perhaps and again breed the next set of unicorns?
Look, I think AI and virtual reality for realestate.com is huge. So the concept of being able to look at houses in a different world and being a richer, more three-dimensional experience will be a big opportunity for the company.
I think that Australians, because of the educated workforce and the culture of early adoption, is incredibly well positioned to take advantage of what we think will be the next big trend in electronics, and artificial intelligence, I guess, is a part of that. But we believe that software will become intelligent itself, and in order to make the complex electronics products of the future, software will have to learn as it is used. And there are so many opportunities, as I think Richard mentioned. People can work from anywhere. For young Australians to get connected into the global world of developing technology. We have engineers working all over the world, sometimes in small groups and sometimes on their own, including some still in Hobart, where we were started in the early 1980s.
So one of the problems with those big buzzwords, blockchain, 100 other things, is that most people that use the buzzwords don't actually know what they mean, really. And that's frustrating for me because I do understand most of that technology. I'm pretty deep technologically. But if I had to pick something that is meaningful and that would be meaningful for a very long time, it is actually the move towards machine learning, natural language processing, decision support, decision trees, artificial intelligence. It's not, unfortunately, all those words can be defined in many different ways and mean slightly different things to slightly different people. But let me give you an insight that I think is, for me, is a very important one that is something that I'm transmitting inside the company. I think it'll be a long time before there are self-driving cars. I appreciate that the technology is advancing very quickly and there's an enormous amount of investment, but I think the regulatory burden that we're going to face in getting cars driving around, and what happens if a self-driving car has an accident? Who do you sue? There's all sorts of complex problems that we haven't resolved. It's not the AI issue with that, but it's fundamentally changing a model which is very, very, very large. And I think even more complex and challenging is self-driving trucks. I mean, the moment some truck goes off the roads and kills a child, there's a 30-tonne or 60-tonne load on the back of a truck. It's devastating if that thing goes wrong. Even if it has far less accidents than the human-driven truck, the first time it happens as a computer and not as a human, we'll have an anti-computer revolution of Luddites asking for things to be taken back to where they were. But that is not true in process management and internal structures. I mean, in fact, Altium does an enormous amount of work that engineers used to do. We used to use Bishop graphics and run little tapes over plastic and figure out how to route things. You press a button on the Altium product and it does all that for you. That's actually a form of machine learning and artificial intelligence. We've been living with artificial intelligence, even though we don't know it, for many years. It's just getting better and faster. And so in the supply chain, we're looking for consciousness-free processing of many parts of the supply chain, which, if it went wrong, nobody would die. Your goods might be delivered late or a bit more expensively than you would otherwise intended. So there's an opportunity in a lot of places to do very smart things with computers, given the power of the compute, given the software development skills that are now around, and given the tools that we have. I think we're going to be in a new era, a golden age of computer development where machine learning, probably better to call it machine learning because artificial intelligence sort of makes you think about data from Star Trek. And the guy that can't conjugate his words or use... anyway, it doesn't matter. So the point is that this whole machine learning thing is a huge opportunity, and incrementally, little by little, we can take out the drudgery out of very dull and very low value production tasks. So the real risk in that is actually offshoring, because what is likely to happen is that high value jobs stay in country and low value production systems become either evolve out of existence or become very machine driven, where the labour cost is a very small part of the cost and therefore they can be onshored again. So that's my vision of the future.
All right, I think we're out of time, but thank you very much, gentlemen. That's been really insightful, interesting.